Hi everybody, it's Brad with Big Family Homestead, and in this edition of the Homestead Nation, let me tell you what, we have got an incredible guest. High energy Gavin Syme. He is all about liberty, protecting your rights, First Amendment, Second Amendment, your rights. He is about freedom and liberty, and this guy does not simply just speak it, he walks the walk, and it's pretty awesome. I will say in advance, please don't forget to click like and subscribe and get ready to share this one because you're going to want to share this information. There's a lot of information. It's a long interview, but quite frankly, I loved every minute of it. I was just enjoying all the information. So please enjoy this edition of the Homestead Nation with Gavin Syme. Don't forget to go to the other websites, the other YouTube pages, and make sure that you're giving them some clickage love too. So there you go. Enjoy this edition of the Homestead Nation.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Homestead Nation. Today we got a great guest, Gavin Syme, ran for Congress. Gavin Syme, Liberty movement leader. This guy's doing a ton of great stuff out there. From A to Z, he's covering a lot of things, and he spends a lot of time with a lot of different people, and we're just happy and pleased as all get out to be able to have him on our little show here. Gavin, welcome to the show. Thanks for stopping by.
Hey, good to be here, guys. Look forward to chatting.
Awesome. I guess the first thing, I know pretty much everyone that's going to be watching this is going to know you or know about you or have seen some of your videos. You're all over out there. But if you could give us the 15 to 30 second bio of who Gavin Syme is.
I'm a homeschooled Christian patriot that grew up and got married and started a small business and increasingly realized, gosh, we're losing our country and we're losing our liberty. And so while I was always aware of it, at some point in the past, however many years, I just said enough is enough. And early on, it started with me standing up to checkpoints and things like that. Ultimately, it went into me running for United States Congress here in Washington last year and losing, but at the same time, starting some huge conversations and kind of turning the district upside down. And one thing has just led to another. And whether it's me out there, making a video and trying to educate and inform people, or me getting arrested in a courtroom, there seems to always be something going on. My day job is in photographics. I do portraits of families, I do pictorials, and I teach photographics to photographers. So that's kind of my background is in visuals, and then that has kind of crossed over because I know a lot about media and communications and stuff like that. So that crosses over effectively into me doing public comms and trying to just encourage people to step up and stand up for God and country and not just sit on the sidelines and really get involved.
Well, let me ask you this, Gavin, now, because I've watched several of your videos, and I got to say that, you don't get where you are today without a starting point. Now, here's the thing. Tell me about your first major clash. What was it? Intimidating? What happened? What you say it was with dealing with checkpoints? How
yeah.
act?
No, what state are you guys in?
Well, I'm in Ohio.
Okay. And are you both in Ohio?
No. I'm in North Carolina.
Okay, so you're kind of out of this zone, and I'm in Washington. But for my work, we travel a lot. So we have a trailer. We call it the Super Camper. It's all set up with solar and stuff like that. So it's pretty much an off-grid unit. And I load the family up, and it's kind of become our prepper rig too. But that's a little bit of another story. So we load up, and I would go out on these road trips, and still do when I have time, and do image making, but also record educational workshops and stuff like that for photographers. And what would happen is I would say to the wife, well, do you want to go and live in the camper for 3 months? We'll go somewhere warm. And she's like, okay. So we would take off. And so we go down, right. We go down to the, we took a couple of winter trips down in the southerly direction, all the way up as far as Louisiana, but Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, those kind of things. Well, along the border states, they have, as many people are aware, these Border Patrol checkpoints. Now, I was raised a awake Christian, liberty-minded kind of person, but not to the degree of really understanding what makes it all tick, the nature of law, the nature of the Constitution. I was awake. I wasn't totally brainwashed, but as time went on, I started seeing more and more tyranny. And what really was the turning point for me was I grew up, some would argue that, I had a few kids. I started going on the road, and here I am trying to live the American dream, out there exploring and paying the bills and just, raise my family. And we're dealing with these checkpoints in Arizona, New Mexico, things like that. And they'll be right in the middle of the interstate, right in the middle of the highway, and they'll pull you over, as I'm sure you guys have seen in videos, and say, well, are you an American citizen, et cetera, et cetera. And this really bothered me. I mean, it really bothered me in my heart, and I couldn't quite get over it. I've always hated bullies. I shouldn't say hated. I've always disdained bullying. I don't really hate anybody. I just hate evil. I hate tyranny. And I felt like, wow, this is just manipulating people. I'd seen some videos before of kind of some of the early pioneers, I guess you could say, in the past decade of standing up to these Border Patrol checkpoints. And I started thinking about this because now I was in it. Now I was traveling in an area where they had these. And I finally just said, enough is enough. And I remember the first time I did it, and that video is not out there. It's in the archive somewhere because I always film everything. But it's kind of chaotic. There's kids yelling in the back seat because we had little ones. We still do. And it was in Texas, coming out of Big Bend National Park up, I think it was Highway 63. And I came up to this checkpoint on the highway, and I had been thinking, what am I going to do about these? This really bothers my sense of justice, my sense of liberty, and my sense of accountability for government, because I knew it was wrong. I knew it was a violation of the Fourth Amendment, and I'd seen people talk about it before. And so I was in this position of, do I tolerate this or do I stand up to it? And I found myself on the internet, like, looking, do I have to comply with this, et cetera, and really finding no answers. So I really had no idea where I was at, other than I knew that some people had stood up to him before, and some people had also gotten arrested and beat up for it before. Mm-hmm. So I was uncertain about this. And yes, in answer to your question a minute ago, I was absolutely terrified. I came up to this checkpoint, and I said, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to sit there and comply. And my level of noncompliance was a bit less than it is now. I'm a bit more, I guess you could say, defiant against tyranny now, because I had no idea how to do it. We weren't taught growing up how to stand up against tyrant bullies and bureaucratic terrorists. So we came to this checkpoint, and the guy said, are you an American citizen? Or I forget, I'd have to review the video. I think he said, where are you coming from? He said, where are you coming from? And I looked him in the eye, I said, that's none of your business. And he said, well, pull over to secondary. And I looked over to secondary, and I'm kind of mulling all this over while sitting there shaking with kids yelling in the back seat, not knowing what they're going to do here, because this is the feds after all. Mm. And I said, well, am I being detained? He said, pull over to secondary. I said, am I being detained? He said, pull over to secondary. And I said, no. And I put the truck in park, and I blocked the highway for 15 minutes, and I refused to move. And he went and got his guys. I mean, and I wasn't getting out of that truck. That was my close to a safe zone as I got. Yeah. And they came out, and they're saying, you have to move, and they're asking me questions. And I answered a couple of them, but I didn't tell them where I was coming from. I didn't tell them where I was going to. Now, at this point, knowing what I know now, I wouldn't answer any of their questions. I would turn it back on them and ask them questions. Mm-hmm. But ultimately what happened with that is they called out the big shots, and everybody rolled in, and they looked in the window, and they looked at the kids to make sure I wasn't importing them, I guess, and they just let me go. So nothing bad happened from that. And at that point, as terrified as I was, looking in my rearview mirror, wondering if there was a drone strike coming after me, I recognized that we cannot have liberty unless we're willing to stand up for what's right. Somebody else is not going to do it for us. And,
Dude,
and over time...
I'm sorry. I
no, you're fine.
Dog, because I know exactly how that is. When you're at McDonald's and you order that chicken sandwich and they say, please pull ahead, I say, no, I will not. I will not.
He's a rebel at McDonald's. Well, there's practice, you know. I mean, hey, and you know what? It's funny you mentioned that, because I actually have done that, not because they're government, but I've been at I think it was Burger King years ago, and this Burger King in our town was notorious for taking forever. You know, they'd say pull ahead, and 20 minutes later they'd come out and bring you your food. And so it wasn't like defiance against government. I'm like, this is ridiculous. And one day I said, no, I'm not pulling ahead. Give me my food. And they reached over and handed me my food. Like, it was sitting right there.
Boo!
In any case,
I'm happy right here.
Yeah. So I allow, private institutions can be poor, and I can choose not to support them. The problem with government is we can't really opt out, because when you do, they show up at your house with a billy club and beat the crap out of you.
Right. And they have a monopoly.
Yeah,
a monopoly
exactly.
on force.
And so this was the beginning, I guess, of my dissent. And what I realized, the one video, probably was a year later, but I came back and dealt with another checkpoint, and I had time to kind of shore up my belief in what I was standing for, and that this wasn't about whether I had to ask questions. It wasn't about, oh, it only takes 5 minutes. It was about, this is wrong. This is illegal, and I'm not going to tolerate it. And that's the video that it is out there pretty far and wide. And that's when I pulled up to the checkpoint and I said no, and I started lecturing them. I actually ignored the checkpoint guard, and I turned back to the camera. And this was kind of a shifting point, because in checkpoint videos, we usually see people interacting with the lawless public official, which I do. But I thought, well, what happens if I treat them with the disregard they deserve as criminals, and I turn to the people and I say, this is why we're doing this. And basically, since then, that's what my stands have been all about, is standing against tyranny, but promoting this message of principle, of liberty, and the understanding that until we recognize that the unlawful suffering of our neighbor is as evil as if it were ourselves, we cannot have liberty.
And that's a great story, and I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying. Even the McDonald's comment from Brad, but I want to ask you this: anytime you put up a video, it's fairly controversial. Meaning, there always seems to be that group of folks that come out and give you the thumbs down and say, oh, you should just do what you're told, and you made the mistake, and basically you got to lick their boots and do what they say. You're an idiot for standing up for your rights, which I wholeheartedly disagree with, and I agree with what you're doing, and I try to support that where and when I can in my comments with my thumbs up. But are you seeing a shift from the point where you started this movement? Are you seeing a shift in the public? Are they getting behind you more? Have you seen the comments or the thumbs up, thumbs downs change? One of the nice things about YouTube is you get that instant feedback. What have you seen from the start up until the current?
Well, quite candidly, here's where we're at. Number one, I have seen results. I've seen people be educated. I get messages all the time from people all over the world saying, how do I stand up? And I say, well, put a camera on it and talk about it. It's hard to stand up, and it's not easy to tell people how to fix liberty. But in some ways, yes, I've learned how to deal with situations better, and yet there's some situations that I'll deal with, and they just get under people's skin. I don't think there's any of my videos that have more dislikes than they do likes. Generally, the majority is in favor. The problem I have is that I care less about the numbers. Obviously, I want people to support it because I want them to support the idea of standing up for yourselves. Sure. But the problem is, a lot of people, even that support it, they watch these videos and they say, rah, rah, Gavin. And what I recognized is that people, number one, they want to be entertained. And number two, they want a superhero to fix everything for them. And let me just say, I'm not Superman. I'm not here to fix the world's problems. I only know of one superhero, and he's up there. And we're going to have to do some of the work ourselves down here. And I get frustrated more so by inaction of people, I think, than by the trolls and the haters. Because I deal with the trolls all the time. At first, it's frustrating, and sometimes it's discouraging. They hate me because I love Jesus, or they hate me because I stand up to government, or they hate me because my teeth aren't perfectly straight. I mean, it's always some ridiculous thing. People hate truth in America. And I don't know what the ratios are. I don't know what the numbers are, but we're a nation of slaves. And that's what I want people to change. I want people to start standing up for their families and their neighbors themselves. And basically my message is always, it's time to start being defiant, standing principled, but bold for what's right.
And you segue.
That's where we're at.
Go ahead.
No,
I was going to just follow up on that and say, could I cut in here for a second? I know you're about to ask a question.
No, absolutely. Go ahead.
I want to do what you do. Frankly, I'm scared to death because of what you said earlier. They're going to come after me and beat the heck out of me and or kill me if I don't handle it just right, or if one of them are having a bad day. And even worse than that, they're going to get away with it more often than not. So being one guy, and I'll tell you what, I give you all the props in the world. You got a ton of guts doing what you do. What would you say to a guy like me that thinks the same way you do, or similar lines of thought, but I'm scared to death to end up on the wrong end of the billy club or looking down the barrel of the 45?
I think people assume that I'm not scared to death, and admittedly it gets easier. And usually what I say to people is, look, number one, I never do, and you notice this, I never do anything without a camera. I mean, if there's a public official engaging with me, there's a camera. In fact, I'm a huge Second Amendment supporter. I carry a lot of times, but I always carry a camera. I mean, I won't walk from the car to the to the backyard because I never know when something's going to happen and I'm going to need to pull out that camera. I not only carry that camera, I train with it. I make sure the batteries are charged. I make sure I know how to turn it on quickly, how to make sure and pay attention that it's not on. And the truth is, right now, we may be coming to a state in America where we have to defend our families with force of arms. But until that point, we spread the conversation and try and inform as many people as possible with force of the camera. Because the truth is, as bad as government is getting, and they keep getting worse, we're constantly every single day seeing these horrible things government does on video. And without that, people would not be informed and educated and they wouldn't wake up. What I tell people is, hey, first of all, keep it low key. You don't have to go face to face and toe to toe. You can just stop across the street if you see somebody pulled over, on Main Street, and pull over to the side of the road and just roll down your window a little and hold a camera out. And even that's terrifying at first because you're afraid the officer is going to come over and say, what are you doing? Well, so what? When an officer comes over to me, and this is one thing I've learned. When I ran for Congress, there was a senator that I spent some time with, a state senator that's real respected. He's kind of I guess you could say he's kind of the Ronald Reagan of Washington. And he was a senator back in the 90s. And so I'd go have coffee with him, and he said, well, here's what I learned is that you should take a cue from Jesus. You answer a question with a question. And so if I'm in a hostile situation, if I go and film like a police officer or something like that, and there are various articles on my blog about some tips and how to deal with this. But the first thing that happens if I'm engaged by a public official, especially a police officer, because the truth is they're really not very well trained and they're really amateurs. And I don't mean to sound egotistical in this, but they're trained that people will comply with them because they're intimidating. And so they show up, and if you've ever been pulled over, which I'm sure we all have, the first thing they do is assert themselves. They ask you for your ID, or they ask you for your driver's license, registration, proof of insurance. They do something that asserts themselves. And the first thing I do to a police officer, not that I don't necessarily comply, but the first thing I do is assert myself back. So if I stop and I film a police officer and he comes up to me and he says, what are you doing? I'll look at him and I'll say, what are you doing? And the moment you reverse the role and let that officer know, and your tone of voice matters, your stance matters, the moment you let a servant know that you regard them as a servant because that's what they are, and that you will treat them as a servant. It has nothing to do with disrespect. It's like, hey, you're my employee, you answer to me, and I'm here to ask the questions. And I flat out told these officers, I'll say, I'm not here to answer questions, I'm here to ask them. And I have no problem doing that. So really assert yourself. And sometimes because of this assertiveness, people say I'm an ass. But the truth is in some situations, this could be life and death. I see all the time people taking on police officers. The moment they falter, the moment they say, well, I think you have to do this, the officer knows they have the boot on their neck and they take control of the situation. I don't let that happen. It doesn't mean I'm going to get in a fist fight for them. I've been arrested. I let myself be arrested. I'm not at the point, even though if you're being arrested unjustly and unconstitutionally, you have a moral right to defend yourself. That doesn't always mean it's the right time to do so. It doesn't always mean it's best for the message. And I have no problem with that. But what I would say to people is start by filming your government. Start by asking questions. Always do it with a camera, and you can do it really low-key. I mean, you can park across the street in the car, and honestly, most areas, police are used to being filmed enough, they're probably not even going to say anything to you. And you'll be sitting there, and your heart will be pumping, and you'll be all worked up, and your adrenaline will be rushing. It's scary because we're not used to standing up. I mean, I won't lie. I've had situations that weren't even that intense where I would take on police officers, and you get this adrenaline rush to the point where you're sick afterwards. I mean, you actually kind of feel ill because when you're coming down off that, you're just not used to that. A few weeks ago, I had one where I called 911 on a police officer, and that was interesting because I've done it enough times that I got to the end of that and I'm like, wow, I didn't even have an adrenaline rush. And it was actually a little creepy because I'm like, I don't know if I want to be that used to doing this. So
you're looking for that next
bro,
bigger
you're a junkie. Now he needs to step up to military. I'm only going to be threatened by military.
Well, and the thing is, I mean, people think I like doing it. The truth is I don't, because usually it is an adrenaline rush. Usually, I'm there to hold them accountable, but more importantly, I'm not there for myself or for the officer or government official, because usually they've already chosen to be lawless. I'm there to help educate all of us and make us recognize that we have to stand up. If you think the people on Lexington Green weren't terrified, you're dreaming. I mean, it's just there's nothing wrong. Courage has nothing to do with whether you're afraid. Courage has to do with recognizing right and wrong and being willing to stand for it. And that doesn't mean everybody needs to do it exactly the same way I do. Everybody doesn't need to be a video activist, but I think it's a good way to train yourself to deal with standing up against bullies and against lawlessness, because you condition yourself that when you see something, you're going to take action if need be.
Wow. Now let me ask you this. You deal with a lot more legal type stuff, and you see a lot more than the average bear does, the homesteader, the prepper, the survivalist type, just because that's part of your world. It's a day-to-day
Right.
thing. Now, here's the question. Do you think that we have returned to pre-revolution England, serfs and lords, and we can't really own much, and we're right back where we started? Or do you think we're on our way there? Do you think there's a way out? What are your thoughts on the State of the Union?
I think we're actually have more tyranny than pre-revolution England. I think our government is worse. And I'm not the historical expert. I know people that are way better at history than me, and I don't pretend to be the historical expert. But it's interesting because I just spent 3 days up in Marble, Washington for their God and Country event. It's an annual large Christian patriot kind of gathering. And it's basically where the legislators and the activists and just the everyday people, and we're getting together and we're talking about the state of things. A week ago, we saw the Supreme Court declare themselves essentially the church state. They just totally threw away the First Amendment. They declared themselves null and void. And some people will say, no, this was about liberty. It has nothing to do with liberty. The government has no authority to be involved in any fashion in what is purely a religious institution. The government, and I don't believe it or not, you will see it happen. The persecution of Christians is coming. The persecution of anyone who opposes government is coming. They've essentially just declared themselves the religious oligarchy, and we're coming to the tipping point. A line was just drawn, and this is the vibe of everybody pretty well at this event. And I'm talking pastors, I'm talking state legislators. There's a lot of people, as liberal as Washington is, we have a lot of patriot people that understand this, and I think we're to the point where there is no fixing it in terms of voting. We're not going to vote a president good enough. America is too much of a nation of slaves to vote somebody who's that solid. And the truth is, I'm not saying don't vote. I'm not saying don't support good legislators, especially on the local level, because I think at this point we're seeing we need to kind of pull back to a state, to a county, try and get good sheriffs, try and get good legislators, because I think we're about to see America in terms of the union come apart.
Wow. I've watched a lot of your videos, love them. Here's the thing that I think a lot of people that are, we all feel there's something wrong. We don't know what to do. And the reason why I'm going to ask you this next question is because I think it's fundamental to the issue of getting to what's next. Please explain the difference in what is a right and what is a privilege.
If you want to get back to the fundamental nature of law, and this is what I always try to do, a right is natural. It's God-given. That's how I like to refer to it. But if people aren't into that, call it natural law, call it whatever you want. But the truth is, if you go back to the fundamentals, the right goes back to life, liberty, and property. There's two things people should study on this if you want to understand law. And I get questions all the time. People think I'm a lawyer, and I'm not a lawyer. I know lawyers, and I talk to lawyers, and I could talk circles constitutionally around most lawyers, because I literally in my whole state know of 1 or 2 or 3 lawyers that actually understand the nature of law and liberty. And one of them was Stephen Pidgeon, who defended me in my court case and did a brilliant job, even though we still got railroaded. But a right versus a privilege, the nature of law. And if you study Frederick Bastiat's The Law from the 1850s, he was a Frenchman. It's a very short book. It sums up the nature of what law is. Law is life, liberty, and property. So that's the fundamental rights. The fundamental right is life, liberty, property, and everything connected to it. Also, you should study John Locke's Second Treatise of Government. And both of these are fairly short volumes that if you do this, people say, well, how do you understand all this? Do you sit around and study law? Well, yeah, I look up legislation. I look up law when I need to. But the truth is I understand the nature of law. And the nature of law is that our right is our life, our liberty, our property. And as such, anything, and this is what John Locke asserted when he talked about a government by the consent of the governed, a republic, which is what we're supposed to be, is that anything, any legislation any act of government that is not there to protect life, liberty, and property is not law. It is lawless, and it must be opposed as such. So people come to me, and especially this is a problem that fellow Christians have. Well, Romans 13 says to obey the higher authority. Romans 13 in no way tells us to obey tyranny. The higher authority is God, natural law, however you want to affirm it. The higher authority is this is law. So when a legislator or a Supreme Court justice says you have to do this, something that defies the very foundational nature of law. This isn't something America invented. This is something the political philosophers understood. You know, John Locke's works were in the mid-1600s, well before we founded the United States. Yeah. He understood the nature of law. A privilege, I think arguably a government really has no business in privileges. You know, if I have private property and I say you can camp on my private property, that's a privilege. I've granted you the right to use my property. If government says here's a road that you paid for and we're giving you the privilege to drive on it, they're a liar. The government doesn't give you the privilege of traveling. They don't give you the privilege of speech. They don't give you, and they treat it like they do. The Supreme Court has become supreme dictators and legislators, not arbiters. You know, the framers understood. They said flat out, if the Supreme Court overrides the Constitution, it has no merit. A judge or a legislator that steps outside of the boundaries of the Constitution, in this case when they were debating the Constitution in 1788, it's not law, it's lawlessness. There is no law in a lawless action. So our society, and this is what I'm getting at for the listeners, our society collectively looks at law as what their government tells them, what their legislature has passed. That's not what law is. Legislation and law are very different, just like rights and privileges. Law is directly connected to your rights. You cannot have law that violates rights, because if you do, it is not law, it is lawless. Law is not defined by government. Law is defined by God. Law is a natural fundamental law that comes down to life, liberty, and property. Anything outside that is not law. It is tyranny, and it should be regarded with the disdain it deserves.
Okay, so I have two. His mind was just blown. I have two things I want to come back with. First, I want to play devil's advocate and say, okay, Mr. Anti-Government, if you don't believe the government has any place in there, what do you think the government's place is? I'll start with that question.
So, and understand, I'm going to argue with you as if you're the public official who's playing devil's advocate.
Oh crap!
Are you saying you're an anarchist?
No, I'm not saying
because
that.
I support law. I don't know what you support, but law is to protect life, liberty, and property. So if you are not doing that, you're the anarchist. That's what you are as an anarchist. I support the law.
No. He'll eat me for lunch, man. He does this.
And so, but that would be my answer to that, because people try to play this game.
What is government's role? I mean, government has a role. Would you agree that government has some role in society, or no?
Yeah. Because the truth is, and some people really disagree with me on this, they say there should be no government at all. First of all, the government should be the people. And in America, it is the people, except for we've handed it over to tyrants. On principle, it's the people. On the Constitution, it's the people. The irony is that the supreme law is still the right of the people. Government's role is to protect life, liberty, and property. End of story.
Okay.
So, and your property, your rights end where your neighbors begin. The dividing line, this is why I recommend people read John Locke, because the dividing line, law is so simple. Law is, hey, you have stuff. I want it. So I take it. Well, I'm lawless because I violated your property. You now have the right to defend that property. The government's entire role, almost every piece of legislation, every regulation, and running for Congress, this came up a lot, almost every federal law is lawless, because especially at the federal level, the states have more rights. At the federal level, this is the law right here. This is it. Right here, the Constitution. This is not only a law of rights, this is the extent of what the federal government can be involved in. And this is why we're past the point of fixing the federal government, because it can't be done at this point without rebuilding.
Okay, so here's my follow-up. In a nation, because we were supposed to be a constitutional republic, and over time they have taught us through the public schools that it's a democracy, not a constitutional republic. You ask, I would guess 90% of the American citizenry, if asked, they'd say we live in a democracy. But
right.
in a land now where the executive branch, the judicial branch and the legislative branch are effectively lawless and actually practicing outside their jurisdiction.
Right.
What do we do? I mean, you said, hey, grab a camera and try to educate people, but I also heard you say at some point it may come down to taking up arms. Is there anything in between those two?
Let me first of all, I'm going to answer that, but let me first of all read something that speaks to that, written by John Locke in the second treatise. Wherever law ends, tyranny begins. If the law be transgressed to another's harm, and whosoever in authority exceeds the power given him by the law and makes use of the force he has under his command to compass that upon the subject, which the law allows not, ceases in that to be a magistrate, and acting without authority may be opposed as any other man who by force invades the right of another. And so the government at this point, the United States government has declared war on the people at this point. I'm not saying to all of us preppers and patriots out there, let's go grab our guns and take back the Capitol, because, you know, as a patriot, as a principled person, as a Christian, I truly believe that revolution is the last resort of good men. And I think the framers upheld this. They didn't shoot until they were shot upon. You know, you go back to Lexington Concord, and I think that's a great standard. I don't mean everybody in the American Revolution was perfect. I mean, if you go back to Lexington Concord, it wasn't a bunch of ragtag radicals. The person standing there on the Concord Green, do you know what the Concord Green was? It was the church square. It was the churchyard. And the person out there that day leading it up and giving the blessing to standing up was the pastor. I believe it was Jonas Clark was his name. And so they had a fundamental role. And so a couple of things on this note. Number one, the pastors in America have totally failed. They're over here cowering, saying we don't get involved in politics. There's no difference in a practical sense. When you're talking about liberty and justice, if I'm a Christian, I love liberty and justice, and I stand up for my neighbor. So it has nothing to do with politics. It has to do with standing up for what's right. In terms of where we draw the line, I think there's three phases of dissidence. The first is protest, and I think we're largely past that stage. I mean, you go and you have a protest, and the tyrants look out of their castle windows and mock us. Okay, the next phase is defiance, and that's kind of what I've been involved in this past year, is like the rally we had in Olympia where we put 3,000 armed people on the Capitol lawn. And we didn't just protest, we committed a felony to defy this new law that was passed that said, hey, you can't even hand a gun to somebody without a background check. So we brought 3,000 people to the front porch of the Capitol, and we said we will not comply, and we defied them in the very literal sense in the largest felony civil disobedience in American history. Awesome. Now, that, and I'll be honest, when I was organizing that, you know, I was working with the Bosworths and some other patriots from Washington State, but I headed this up, and I was kind of leading the charge on this, and so whatever happened there fell on me, and I'm like, dang, I sure hope we don't start the next American Revolution today, because I'm going to be the guy that's going to get blamed on if we do. And the truth is, this was the beauty of this. We had 3,000 people gathered there in the middle of December in Washington.
Oh my gosh.
And it, you know, there's some videos of this, there's some articles we wrote about this. We got there early. The State Patrol was all over the place. We didn't know what was going to happen. There was a little more beautiful than being in the middle of December in Olympia on a foggy day, and it's 7 a.m. in the morning, and here come these patriots marching out of the fog with their guns in their hands.
Awesome.
And it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so this went down, and all of this happened. And when everybody dispersed, there was, and I'm not kidding, there was not so much as a piece of litter on the ground. Wow. And I mean, I was like, and you know, I had been praying a lot because I'm like, this better go well. But so that's the second phase. The second phase is defiance, and that's when we have to be brave. We have to be bold. We have to stand up. And sometimes, yeah, we get arrested, because the third phase is revolt, and that I want that to always be my last result. I'm not going to be the guy that throws the first punch or fires the first bullet, but from a moral perspective, you know, you go back to John Locke, you go back to the principles of liberty, you go back to the principles of this nation and what the founders talked about. Morally, we're past the stage of we have every right to stand up against what our government's doing. But we also have to think in terms of, okay, where are we at? What's the time? Because you talk about 90% of the people still think it's a democracy. This is what I'm concerned about. We're kind of a nation. We're not kind of. We're a nation with a slave mindset. The nation, in the large sense, hates God. They have that right. But, we are a nation founded on godly liberty. I don't mean that everybody's a Christian or that the government should say you have to go to church. Obviously not. Nothing of the sort. But the principle of love your neighbor as yourself is what this nation was founded on. And we don't have that anymore. And people are so ignorant, they're so brainwashed that I'm afraid, quite frankly, that if we come to the point of violent revolt, and honestly, I think we may be getting there, that we're just going to end up with a French Revolution. And so at this point, I'm at the appeal to heaven stage. I'm at the defiance and dissident stage. But let me just say, I've been around a lot of people the past few weeks that are heavily involved, some of them that are legislators behind the scene. And the vibe unquestionably is this is about to come apart. Now, I'm not saying a day. I'm not going to try and say, well, here's the prophetical statement, because I don't know. But things are starting to come unglued. And I think from the perspective of preppers and patriots, we need to be ready, not just in having food stored in the closet, but we need to be ready in heart and in mind and in spirit. We need to be ready to stand for what's right, whatever the situation is. Some of the speakers up there, they said, look, yeah, store up food for your family, but you need to think outside that. You need to be preparing. You need to have food stored to help your neighbor, to help the refugee that's coming from the city across the state. You need to be in a position, because that's the principle of all this. It's not about help myself, help myself, help myself. That's the shallow end of being prepared. It's about, having faith in God and standing up for what's right. And regardless of whatever you believe, making sure that you have the principle of liberty, the principle of loving your neighbor as yourself, and that you're prepared to stand up and defend that.
Amen, brother. Amen, brother. Tell you what, man, I have this feeling that we could probably talk for days and days and days. We all have lives and we all have kids and stuff.
I actually had one more question
You
that
got
I
one
thought would be
question?
awesome, if you don't mind. If you got time,
Go
yeah.
for it, bro.
No,
Go for it.
no problem.
Well, you mentioned something in this rally that you had back in December, and you said, it was in the back of your mind, is this going to be the next American Revolution? I mean, something weird could happen. I also know that you spent time at the Bundy Ranch a year ago,
Right.
This past April, I think it was. That, to a lot of us that were watching on screens across the country, that looked an awful lot like that could have been the
A
spark.
touchstone, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that looked like it could have been the spark. You were there. Tell us a little bit about what that experience was like on the ground.
Yeah, it was nothing like people perceive it as. First of all, as most people have realized now, it wasn't about cows or about grazing. It was about tyranny and liberty, good and evil. That's what it came down to. It was about the federal government being in there abusing people and quite literally in some cases beating people up and trying to drive out people from their land who've been using this for ages. It was government tyranny, nothing more. Now, but the reality is, I went down there. My brother was with me. There was quite a few other patriots. There were some legislators from Washington. So there was a lot of people that showed up there. And that's going to be looked at as a defining point in history. The Second American Revolution really did almost start that day. And I have to be honest. I mean, I was surprised to leave there alive.
Wow.
And it's not even, if you weren't there, it's really not describable, because the intel. I mean, we had intel coming in, and from higher up in government, and it was to the point that Saturday morning where they were sending in the National Guard to disarm the people, which would not have ended pretty. They had snipers out in the hills, drones in the air, and they were coming in to deal with the situation. It was going to be a kill situation. And this is not, I'm not talking about the people that were out there posting Facebook messages, because the disinformation was huge there. People got paranoid. They'd see a light off in the hills and they'd say, oh, the aliens are coming. I mean, it was ridiculous. And we learned a lot about comms there, because the misinformation, nobody really knew what was going on. It got to be that people would go to my Facebook page, because I would just candidly post, this is what's happening. I remember we're sitting out there Saturday night eating fried chicken, and we get a call from a state legislator that said, we hear it's things are going down, that it's coming unglued there, and we have 3 semi-loads of militia and supplies loading up right now. And we're sitting there, and the crickets are chirping, and we say, well, the only thing that's going down is the chicken. So the misinformation was that bad in terms of what was coming off the ground, even though we were all sitting right there. So, and that was with cell phones most of the time still working. And so it was really an eye-opener in terms of communications and how we need to really, as an individual, make sure that you're not being paranoid and spreading misinformation. Use facts. Sometimes us prepper, patriot-minded kind of people, we see something and we read too much into it and we like to put it out there and sensationalize it a little bit. We need to not be the news media. Mm-hmm. We need to be factual and down to earth because people's lives could rely on this. The second thing was I count that incident ending peacefully. Call it what you will. I call it divine intervention because what really happened, and you see this edited out in some of the Patriot videos, what ultimately happened is Cliven Bundy got up there that day and he said, this is the message for the sheriff. The BLM comes, they lay down their guns at the bottom of the flagpole, and they release our cattle. And you have 1 hour. And so we're all like, oh, great. And this is the same time as we have information coming in saying they're sending the troops in. And so we're like, okay, this is not going to be pretty. So, I've never been in a situation where I looked at the gun on the wall and I actually had to decide in my mind, okay, we have women and children and patriots all over this place. What's going to be my first step when they come in and start shooting people? Because that's what was expected at that point. I mean, we were standing in there with experienced combat veterans and discussing, okay, what do we have for medical supplies? The reports say there's a Black Hawk helicopter at the airport. How long is everybody going to survive? It's only going to take about 30 seconds. So, I mean, this is the situation that we were in. And what ultimately happened is, 200 people rode out to the BLM encampment to get their cattle back. And what you see is a standoff with them on these videos, and the BLM people are on their megaphones saying, go away in the name of the law, basically, and they're saying no. And then you see Ammon Bundy go up, and he's talking to them at this gate, and things were very tense. There was a Patriot sniper up on the overpass. The interstate was actually stopped at one point, and the Sheriff Gillespie from the county, Clark County Sheriff, which covers Las Vegas and all the way up around that area. It's a huge area. And he's completely corrupt, and he was going along with them the whole time. For whatever reason, and this is where I call divine intervention, he sent his people in at that point, and they said, this is done. You're leaving right now to the BLM. And the same sheriff told the Patriots, look, if you guys attack, we're gonna fire back. Ditto for the BLM, and you guys have to leave right now. They didn't even let them pack up their stuff. They had to send contractors in to get their stuff.
Wow.
So what's left out of it, because it doesn't sound as good, is that the truth is the sheriff rode in and stopped the action. And we very likely would have had a shooting situation had that not happened. Now, that's not to diminish any from the people that were standing there that day, because it's not diminished at all. They were ready to stand up for their country and for their liberty. The point is, we were way outgunned. We didn't intimidate them by the force of our arms, because 200 guys with AR-15s next to a Black Hawk helicopter is not going to go very far. So Bundy Ranch, though, it wasn't a protest, and that's the important thing to understand. This was not a protest. This was armed people who were ready to defend their families if need be. And the corrupt sheriff came in and for whatever reason didn't want a bloodbath on his hand and said, all right, we're done here. We're not going to do this. And so that ended the situation. But it was a turning point in terms of us understanding we have to be willing to stand. We have to be willing to do what's principled and right, even if it costs us everything. And also that we need to be prepared in terms of communications, in terms of logistics, in terms of food, whatever. We don't need to be paranoid about it. We don't need to be freaking out, oh, I don't have this or I don't have that, because the prepper mindset tends to lean to that. You go to a prepper speaker and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't have the money for the speedboat. And how am I going to do without that? And it's like, you know what, for me, I've chosen not to be paranoid. When I can buy a new quality gas can and fill it up and stick it in the garage, or buy some bags of grain and put them in there, or buy a new communications radio or something like that. I do, but I don't live paranoid, because the truth is, if things come apart, we've got our appeal to heaven as far as I'm concerned, and otherwise we're host.
So we didn't even get to the most recent court case and the travesty that went on there. I want people to go to your channel. If they haven't seen it, they got to check it out. You posted a video where your attorney gave his closing argument, and it sounded like a slam dunk to me. But everything's so corrupt and the system's so corrupt that it went against you. Real quick, are you going to appeal that decision?
There was actually a patriot in the courtroom, and he walked up to the attorney afterwards and pulled an envelope of $100 bills out of his pocket and said, "You have to appeal this." Now, here's the thing, though. When I first started this, I didn't go into that courtroom. If you need to start with the video of what happened in the courtroom. It was a young man who's a friend of mine being charged because he asked an officer a question. He wanted to know why he was being stopped. So they charged him with a misdemeanor. He took it to trial. It was total shenanigans the whole way. They blocked him every step of the way in doing his pro se defense. So a bunch of us showed up there just to make sure it was on the up and up. This insane court in Douglas County under Judge McCauley went off the rails, and you can see all of this and what the court did in that initial video, which is on my channel. It's also on callmegab.com. And so just a real brief overview. I was charged. My dad was charged. My dad did nothing. He was standing up in the courtroom. I, of course, engaged with this judge and had oral arguments with her. And I didn't break the law because I was defending the law. They were the ones breaking the law, and that's where understanding the nature of law was important. On the other hand, I knew full well I was going to be, if that happened, I was going to be arrested because that's how it works. Short of physically defending yourself, which it wasn't the time for, that's where we were at. So I went to trial a couple weeks ago. I got convicted and sentenced to 14 days. A patriot stepped up and went to the attorney and said, hey, I want to help with this appeal. That appeal goes to the Superior Court, which is still a county court. Tell's original case, which he was railroaded for in this total kangaroo court, went to that same appeals court a week ago, and the judge, I recorded a video on this as well, the judge was a complete fool. I mean, he was an arrogant, tyrant, perversion of justice. And it was absolutely disgusting. So I expect nothing from that appeals court because if the appeal for Tell didn't go anywhere when his trial was a complete kangaroo court, the appeal for my trial is not likely to go anywhere. The next step from there is, well, do we go to state appeals court and move up through the ranks? It's not that we don't have a case, and I've discussed this at length with Pigeon. The question is not whether we have a case. The question is, and he recognizes this as a lawyer. This is not a lawyer who's like, oh, yeah, just give me more money and we'll keep doing it. He's very candid, and he recognizes that things are coming unglued. I mean, he's a patriot, too. He recognizes that the justice in the courts, I said, basically what you're telling me is no matter how good the attorney is, our courts are to the state where you roll the dice, and if you get 6, you win, and if you get any other number, you get railroaded. And he's like, well, I mean, because this is the case we come in. So obviously, like your local county corrupt courts, they get away with more because no one challenges them. But that doesn't mean you'll get justice in state district courts. So even though the state district court might be better, he says, well, we could go there and appeal, and we have a legitimate appeal, but if you lose, they could slap you with $30,000 in attorney fines. So at this point, I think we're to the state. I really do think things are about to come apart in our country. And I'm not going to put a time frame on it, but it's getting close. And the courts are lost. We've allowed the courts to turn into complete perverted tyrants. We didn't stand up for our neighbor in those courts when it started. In the name of justice, we said, yeah, stick those criminals in jail and feed them bread and water, without actually considering the fact that most of those criminals have never been given a trial by jury. They've never been given real due process. They never had a jury of their peers. Some of them, even that committed real crimes, didn't hurt anybody or didn't do anything to deserve the state that they're in, even if they did something wrong, because the state of our justice system and our courts is a complete fraud. It's a complete joke. And the moment you're on the inside, you recognize, oh, this is a scam. This is all about money, it's all about controlling people, and it's all about keeping the slaves in line, which brings us to the jury, because when you get a jury, you don't get a jury of your peers, which would be people who understand and relate to the situation. If there's anybody who's even had anything to do with a situation like I'm in, they will not be allowed on the jury. The judge tells the jury what to do. The judge makes the jury swear an oath to him to uphold the law as he gives it to them. The jury is told nothing about jury nullification. In fact, they are told that they are to set aside their conscience, their faith, and all their personal beliefs and only interpret the law as the judge gives it to them. You cannot have justice in that kind of court. So when you see the state of the courts, I don't regret the stand we made because it started a conversation and informed people. But a lot of people saw that Pigeon's closing argument. They saw what we did in that court, and they're starting to recognize, oh, you can't go into the courts and expect justice because the courts are lost.
Wow. Loads and loads and loads of good information. Now, here's the question I have for you. How can people find out more? How can they help your cause? How can they get involved?
Number one, I would say in terms of get involved in your local area. Get involved in your state. Get involved in your county. And I don't mean go to your local Republican Party or your do-nothing political organization. I mean start getting together and preparing and training and working with people, whatever your forte is. practice your shooting. Learn to run radios. Learn to fly drones and make radios from those. We talked a little bit about that earlier, and I'm starting to get into that, and we haven't had a chance to get into that, and we probably don't have time today. But do things that are practical. Start uniting with people of principle and liberty, and actually go out and get things done, whether it's preparing, whether it's civil disobedience. Try not to do things alone, but if you do, always have a camera, regardless of how many people you have. And if you're in a situation, but it doesn't all have to be activism. You can do things. Don't think you're going to go out in the woods and hunker down with your preps and liberty is going to be restored while you're gone. That's not how this works. No. And so we're all in this. People are going to have to stand up. America's about to get a brutal awakening. And honestly, I think, our total rejection of God the judgment is going to be there. It's simply a natural course. We reject truth and we're going to get the result of that. But regardless of how you interpret it, the bottom line is, the persecution is becoming very real in America. Patriots are being persecuted. Christians are being persecuted. People that stand up are being persecuted. If you're a dissident, you can expect to be persecuted. And it's a scary thing, and that's why I'm glad that I have God on my side, because the worst they can do is kill me. But at the end of the day, regardless of people's faith or personal beliefs, you're going to have to stand up or you're going to have to not stand up. The line is being drawn right now as we speak. You're going to have to choose, and you're going to have to decide, am I going to defend liberty, or am I going to defend evil, or am I going to do nothing, which is basically the same as consenting to evil generally? So I think that's where we're at in terms of, I'm sorry, I think I missed part of the last year question. Where can they find me is callmegav.com, and you can find all my social media, my websites, my YouTube channel, all from there. And, of course, you can find my YouTube channel as well, but rather than give the long URL for that, probably best just to go to callmegav.com.
Well, for supporting you as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's a donation page there. I always appreciate support, and, I spend way too much time on this away from my day job, and so if people want to pitch in and contribute and donate here and there, every bit helps, because this does take a huge amount of my time. And I would say this not just for me, but for everybody. Some people have no money, but they can show up on the ground and they can stand the line. Some people don't have time, but they have money. Start contributing one way or the other to liberty, and for heaven's sake, don't do it to the Republican Party or the Democrat Party or the Libertarian Party or any of them, because your parties and your political clubs are not what's going to fix America. We're past that. We're to the point of supporting each other and building coalitions of patriots that will stand united for whatever's coming.
I'm blown away, Gavin. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Seriously, you got such a pointed, directed message. You've obviously done this before, right? This isn't your first time.
No.
But really, I mean, you just put it all out there on the line, and too many of us are sitting back putting together our preps and thinking we're going to go hunker down out in the woods while liberty's restored, and you just put it out there that, man,
yeah.
We're dreaming. So thanks for coming
There's
by.
nowhere they can't find you.
No,
so, hey,
no doubt.
Thank you guys. Keep standing, and, just start working together and preparing for whatever comes. We'll see what it's going to be, but I think we're going to start seeing it very, very soon, so buckle up.
Well, you heard it here, folks. I'm Tommy from Carolina Prepper Channel.
Brad with the Big Family Homestead.
And we had Gavin Syme today on the Homestead Nation. We'll catch you next time. Thanks a bunch for watching.
Thanks, guys. Be safe.
All right.